I wish I could continue talking to you, Sir Hilary, but I have to share my time, unfortunately. We don't have too much longer because Sir Hilary has to head off. But I would like to take a few questions if possible. So I do have some questions written down from the chats, but my preference is for you all that have questions to come on screen and speak with Sir Hilary yourself. So if you could help me raise your hands, those of you that have questions. The faster you raise, the better, because there isn't a lot of time. So those of you who are comfortable to come on screen and ask your question, I would say, please, please, please keep it short. If anyone is giving long intros, I apologize in advance. I will have to cut you off. But I'm going to go first to Pearl Robinson. Can we have your question, please?
Hi, I didn't expect to be first. Quickly, brilliant talk. I'm wondering about the Pan-African Conference, that's the wrong word, the conference that would be held sponsored by the AU. What was missing for me in the analysis is the politics of who decides what the American government will do at a conference like this. So the outcome, the behavior of the American delegation, all of that was predictable because it was decided before people went. And in my view, American delegation that wants to weigh in on this needs to be lobbying their representatives in Congress to then put pressure on what the American—
Thank you, Pearl. I'm so sorry. I think you got your question in there. I think we got your question there. I'm going to take groups of 3. Sorry, Sir Hilary, I should have said it at the beginning, just in case you want to note this down. But I'm just going to take groups of 3 if possible. So I hope you got that question. And then I think this is Dr. Adebayo. If you want to come on, I think it is.
Yes, but I mean, shouldn't we let people ask their questions or make their statements? Because this is otherwise not going to defeat the purpose of the event. I mean, Professor Robinson was trying to finish her point. I think you should let her. I'm actually prepared to give up my time if that's what it takes.
Professor, we are under time duress because Sir Hilary has to shoot off. She has a hard stop at past.
Okay, I'll give Professor Robinson my own time. Thank you. I just think it's a bit of a sham if you don't let people actually say what they need to say. Let's make it a proper event.
Okay, so if we can have questions sharp and concise, I think that will give more time for Sir Hilary to answer and continue on with his day. So who is next?
I think I'm sorry, I don't know if Professor Robinson, do you want to add anything?
No, I'm not going to add anything. I'm just talking about the political analysis of the outcome of the next big conclave.
Okay. Well, why don't we let, because there's been so much, why don't we let Sir Hilary answer that one? And while Sir Hilary is answering that one, anybody else who has a question, please raise your hand.
Okay. Well, you know, having heard Adair, I certainly will find a way to find an additional 15-20 minutes. I will certainly do that. I wouldn't wish to disappoint him in any way.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
But if we're going to have a global summit on the reparatory justice issue for slavery, transatlantic slave trade, and all of the related crimes, and that this is a joint summit sponsored by the CARICOM governments. And I should say the CARICOM governments are supportive of this. They have made a ruling that they will reach out to the African Union. So there is an agreement by the CARICOM governments of the Caribbean. And it would be a conference, I would imagine, that would deal not only with African states and international states, but also civil rights groups and other organizations. I don't think it would necessarily be an intergovernmental affair. I think it would be a gathering. My sense would be, I have no way of knowing at the stage, but I would like to imagine it would be a gathering of all groups non-state and state who are in the trenches proposing to move this conversation forward. Because at Durban, in my own plenary, I did say that the reparatory justice movement is going to be the greatest political movement of the 21st century. Now, that was 2001. It might have sounded a bit hyperbolic to a few people, but I didn't think I was being hyperbolic. I was trying to look down the future as best I could to see that this movement was going to grow. And in 2001, it didn't look the way it does now, but the fact is that that is evolving. It is evolving to become, and the Black Lives Matter movement has joined in there, and it is now becoming a massive international movement. It's a juggernaut that's going through global politics. So I think that the focus should be on gathering all of the progressive people of the world who would wish to see a closure to the imperial order. Because let's close off and move on. We don't want to be out there dealing with this for the next 200 years. We need to close off, bring an end to that era of violent brutality, of colonization, imperialism. Those who have been the beneficiaries of this must stand up, must be held to account, and that accountability prepared to help to repair the harm they have done so that history can march on. And I believe that if we can pull this off, we will be doing humanity a great favor.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I hope people still have questions. If you could help me raise your hands, or if I can return to Dr. Adebayo, do you want to ask your question now?
Yes, thank you very much. Very quick point, Sir Hilary. Brilliant and magisterial presentation, as usual. First question, the US and Israel had pulled out. The Europeans had made very sure at Durban, made very clear that they would not sign on to a declaration if reparations and slavery was included, the kind of language that we were pushing for. So I just want to know what you would have wanted the African delegations to have done, since there would have been no outcome document without that consensus. An extra day had to be added to the Durban conference after the US and Israel pulled out. And I'd just like to know, because now we have a document that can at least be used for the kind of advocacy and things we're talking about. Very quickly, in terms of global Africa, this is a term that was coined by Kenyan scholar Ali Mazrui. And in his own connotation of global Africa, it's actually rebuilding the bridges between Africa and the diaspora and acknowledging the diaspora. And what I'm struggling to understand with your definition is that Irish Americans and Jewish Americans do not see themselves as subservient or second class to Ireland or Israel. So why would Africans in the diaspora see themselves as second-hand? A last very quick point, Chair, is that there's a UN General Assembly debate of heads of states on reparations next month. And I think that should also be a focus for us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Prof. Yes, well, it is true, of course, that the US and Israel and US eventually had more interest in this Durban and this global conference on the Jewish-Palestinian conversation. For them, the whole thing of slavery, genocide, racism, and so on, their primary focus was on strengthening the Israelis against the Palestinians. That was their strength. And they said that the issue of slavery and slave trading and so on, and these crimes, the terrorism against the African people, they actually said, I think it was Colonel Powell who said this, that this is a domestic issue. that the issue of slavery is a domestic issue in America. It's our domestic concern, and we are not going to be discussing it with other nations. It is not an international discussion, but it has always been an international discussion. And the attempt to say that we are not going to discuss slavery and slave trade in the United Nations context because it's a domestic issue and not a global issue is absolute backwardness. But the critical thing here is, Ade, this conference was taking place in Africa. This is a United Nations conference in Africa. So if the Western Bloc said they didn't wish to discuss it, if the Americans said they didn't wish to discuss it, there were other parts of the world. This is an international conference. And you don't have to roll up your tent and walk away on your continent because powerful groups of the world, the fact that this was taking place in post-apartheid Durban gave South Africa a special responsibility to make sure that that matter was treated with honor. Nigeria, that is the largest exporter of Africans in chains across the Atlantic. Nigeria, that exported more Africans in chains than any other country in Africa, had a special duty to stand up and say, no country has exported more of its citizens than we have in chains, and therefore we must stand our ground. So both South Africa and Nigeria and Ghana had a duty because this conference was taking place in Africa on a subject that had ravished Africa for 500 years. So for them to have treated this conference as if it was an ordinary conference on matters about international health or the green economy, or to treat it as if it's a subject that has no depth of passion and no depth of human anxiety about the world and the poison and the toxicity of racism coming out of slavery. For them, it was totally disgraceful, I would say, that they should not have seen the full import and implication of what they were doing. So that's clear to me. Yes, Ali Majru was always a brilliant philosopher, scholar who understood those tensions and the political differences. He understood all of that. And he realized that on the one hand, intellectuals should formulate the modernization and the refinement of Pan-African cosmology and philosophy. But Ali Majru also realized, I guess, because he straddled Africa the way he did, that Pan-Africanism also had to be an activist organizational structure and framework within which you mobilize not only ideas, but if you have to mobilize armies, you must as well. Not just classroom, but battlefield from time to time. That Pan-Africanism needed to be a structure in which you can pursue justice by all means necessary. Now, once Pan-Africanism had retreated from that consideration, and therefore you needed a more detailed, realistic attempt for the future, the younger generations especially, then Global Africa erupts as the framework. And I think he saw that, and I fully support him in that. And the reason why I asked UNESCO to adopt that approach from the point of view of recording the history of Africa was because Ali Majru had done all the foundation work. And you know he has done all that foundation work, all of those brilliant documentaries he did in which he shared his view and gave us all some insights into African civilization. And it was my duty to say that Ali Majru was correct and let us build on his shoulders. Now, the question about the Jewish state and Jewish diasporas, I am not even sure anymore. I looked at the history of the Jewish state from 48 to present, and I've seen all the various changes in its positions, the Zionist position, the more democratic impulses, and so on. I've looked at all of that. And I don't think that the Jewish state sees Jewish communities overseas anymore as a diaspora. Increasingly, the language is about the Jewish state. And it is understood that the Jewish state is not just confined to the space of land associated with its current location, but that the Jewish state is an international state. I think that's the language, that's the concept I'm hearing. That the Jewish state is an international state, and it's made up of Jewish people all over the world who are part of it, who are citizens of it. You know, many of them in Hollywood and the London financial markets, many of the Jewish community, all over the world, many of them carry the Jewish passports and they're citizens of the Jewish state. Many of them have never been to Israel, you know, but their function in terms of mobilizing capital and foreign policy and political influence, their function as the Jewish international state. Now, this does not fit within our Pan-African concept. So we therefore have no choice but to say, well, we're not members of an African state system, but we're members of our own state system. And to the extent that we have our own states, we cannot be members of your state or citizens of your state and you citizens of ours, but we have our own states. So let us merge them as equal states and let them function as equal states. So we get away from core and diaspora, you know, pure and Creole. We get away from all of those kind of polarities and speak of equality, diversity, and equality.
Thank you so much for such a comprehensive answer. And thank you also, Dr. Adebayo, for the questions as well. And thank you also, Sir Hilary, for giving an extra 15, 20 minutes of your time. So I think that's going to allow us just to ask one or two more questions, if that's okay. So may I please go back to the audience, because this is your event, of course. If you could please help me to raise your hand, and I will take the first person. We do have a few questions in the chat, but I'd rather if somebody wanted to come up and speak directly. Okay, so if there are the reactions, there's a reaction icon at the bottom of the screen. So all you have to do is click on that and you should have the raise hand function. Thank you, Shara Goldsmith. Please go ahead.
Hi, greetings. I had a question in regards to Turks and Caicos. So we are actually not independent as yet. We are still a British overseas territory. And I want to know how can we start to use things like education to begin to move towards decolonization and eventually independence and some sense of reparatory justice.
Thank you so very much from Turks and Caicos. Thank you. Well, again, and this was the burden of Durban, and the refusal to grasp the complexity. The Caribbean is still the one part of the world that has colonies. The African people in the Caribbean are still people who are colonized. So Prof. Ade, I know I think he has a sensitivity to why President Wade and Obasanjo and all of the others took the positions they did. But I think he should be harder on them. I think he should hold them to a higher threshold of responsibility. The Africans in the Caribbean are still the only people in the world living in colonies. We have Martinique and Guadeloupe that are still French colonies. We have the Virgin Islands, Turks and Caicos, Cayman Islands that are still British colonies. So the truth is that about 30 to 40% of the African people in the Caribbean are still under colonization. The European powers still have colonies in the Caribbean. And all of these matters have to be taken into account. So it's not just the slavery, the colonization. The fact is that, oh yes, the Haitians rose up and got their independence, paid their price. The British Islands, mostly the British Islands, most of them rose up against colonization and won their independence. But this process is far from complete. The United Nations has a framework and a policy framework to end colonization. Why is it, therefore, that the African states are totally insensitive or oblivious to the fact that they have millions of their citizens and of their people in the Caribbean still living in colonies of the Europeans? Now, fine, we might have driven the British and the French out of Africa, largely the Portuguese, but they're still in the Caribbean. And that seemed to be a matter of silence. So we are raising the question in the Caribbean every day. Colonization as a global process must end. And we cannot have people anywhere in the world living under colonial structures of governance. Yes, in Turks and Caicos and the Cayman Islands and the British Virgin Islands and so on, yes, there are our people who are still there with a British governor. There's still a person called the governor. The British governor is still governing Black people in the Caribbean, right? These are things that are immoral. These are things that are atrocious. You know, these are things that we must return to. And the reparatory justice movement calls for an end to the colonization of African people. So we all have to be sensitive to this. We can't just assume that, well, we in Africa, we are fine, and we've got rid of all of our colonialists, and we've got rid of our governors. We might have different relations, but we don't have governors anymore. But your people are still living under them in the Caribbean, so you should take umbrage to that fact. And that is why we're saying that Pan-Africanism has gone silent. Pan-Africanism has gone quiet. Pan-Africanism has seemed to have lost its internal forte and has just become a construct for intellectuals and not activists. Intellectuals who are going to be doing magnificent books and helping students to understand, fine, but that is not enough. Pan-Africanism needs to recapture its soul, which is to continue to struggle for the freedom of all African peoples. And I thank my sister from Turks and Caicos for asking that question, because all of us should be coming to the support of people like her in those islands of the Caribbean where a British governor is still calling the shots. So I say to you, sister, you hang in there. We are going to keep pushing and make sure that there's good public education, that there's not only good public education, but that the United Nations, the global world, can come to the realization that what Britain owes the people of Turks and Caicos is development. They had their slavery, they had their free labor out of those Africans on that island, and now they need reparatory justice as development so that they can be free and independent. But to deprive them of development support by saying, oh, well, we don't think they're going to make a viable nation state. And since they're not going to be a viable nation state, they should remain a colony. And that is the British language. They're not going to be a viable economic state, so let them remain a colony receiving aid and living under the tutelage of a governor. We have to reject that calculations and say, no, they are entitled to reparations as a model of development so that they can be treated as a free people running themselves. Thank you, sister.
Thank you so much. It's just such an important point. I think a point that gets overlooked so much. And it's wonderful to hear your thoughts. I think this is going to be our last round of questions. So I'm going to take all three together and then we'll work towards our close. So YV, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, firstly, just want to say thank you very much, Pan-African Organisation, for putting this on, Nigel, and I'm really honoured to be listening to Dr. Hilary Beckles. My question of the one I'm going to choose is, you spoke of Jewish people having protection of their nationality wherever they reside in the world. Do you think nationalism, creating some kind of nationalism identity for all people originating from Africa, is the best way to break free from post-colonial jurisdictions? and I make reference to an organization which was once run by Drew Ali, the Moorish law, who try to do such a thing.
Well, I can say to you that I have always been ambivalent around the concept of nationalism. And that is because I know nationalism to be a double-edged sword. On the one hand, if you're building nations, and if you're building strong, sustainable communities, there is a measure of nationalist ideology that helps in mobilizing human capital, human skills, giving people a sense of identity to strengthen their footing in a very competitive world. I understand that. But there's a point after which it becomes negative, where it closes its mind to other people, it disconnects from other conversations in other parts of the world of a similar nature. And then it also becomes hierarchical. My nation is better than yours. My citizens are superior to yours. And, and that's when nationalism becomes racism. That's when nationalism becomes xenophobic. That's when nationalism does not become progressive, it becomes reactionary. So yes, I understand the two faces of it, or the two stages of it, the two phases of it, but I'm not the only one who shares this view. Many of the great historians have spoken about nationalism as an incipient form of mobilization that is quickly turned into an oppressive force that victimizes other people. Because once you move to the my nation is better than yours, you're laying the foundation for crime, colonization, militarism. Once you get to that stage of believing that your nation has a stronger integrity, your civilization is better than others. So so that is really my views about that. And it's a complex issue, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. Sometimes you use an idea to mobilize, and that very idea turns around and becomes a millstone around your neck. So I will leave it there for now. I think I kind of articulated my division and my ambivalence and on a complex concept.
Thank you so much. And I'll move swiftly to Mukesi. And then after Mukesi, I will also take Jamaica at the same time, please.
Thank you. My question is around, Haiti. We all know what France did to the Haitians in the 1800s after they had freed themselves, and France got the Haitians to pay for having freed for themselves. Are there any moves, presently to get France to pay back what they made Haiti pay them?
The CARICOM Reparations Commission, this for us and the CARICOM, Haiti is a member of CARICOM. This is a top priority. And our reparations advocacy and our reparations diplomacy, and certainly when we imagine and hope and desire a global summit on reparatory justice, that Haiti will be at the center of that. I would like to imagine that Haiti would be the main subject on day one because of what has happened. And Haiti as the grounding of early Pan-Africanist options, because we all owe Haiti. When Haiti declared that slavery is a crime against humanity and put that concept in its constitution in 1804, can you imagine what that did to Africa? When a Caribbean state says that slavery is a crime against humanity and is henceforth abolished. Basically, what they were saying to all the European powers, that what you're doing in Africa is criminal. What all of you are doing in Africa is criminal. That is what the Haitian state said. And when they said that any Black person who arrives on the shore of Haiti becomes automatically a citizen. So all the enslaved Africans in Jamaica, the enslaved Africans in the United States, and all the islands of the Caribbean region. All these enslaved African peoples were jumping on canoes and boats and rafts and heading across the Caribbean Sea to get to Haiti. Thousands of Africans from the United States and all the neighboring islands, they would jump on a boat at night and sail away to Haiti to become citizens. Haiti was a magnet for Black freedom. And it wasn't theoretical. And this is the point I'm trying to make about Pan-Africanism. It wasn't a theoretical construct that the Haitians developed. They put it in their constitution and they enforced it. I am now studying an example of 1816 in which an English slave owner docked his cargo ship in Port Royal, which is one of the main little ports in the Kingston harbor. And while the white man went on land to work out the paper and the cargo and the manifest, the Africans on the ship took the ship and sailed through the night and arrived in Haiti the following day. They arrived in Haiti. And the Jamaica government and the British government sent a delegation out to Haiti to say, we are demanding the return of our property. The president of Haiti, President Pétion, informed them that these Africans who have arrived in Haiti are not slaves, are not property. They are now citizens of the Republic of Haiti under our constitution. So you can take your ship is there, take it and go back to Jamaica with it, take it, it's yours. But those people are not yours. Those people are citizens. Now, we are speaking about the pragmatism of Pan-Africanism, the practice of it, okay? That action alone tells you a great deal about the early incipient structures of Pan-Africanism. I would have, and most of us who are Pan-Africanists, can you imagine if here we are now and most of our African countries are now decades independent, decades of independence. Nigeria, Ghana, we know the independence. Could you imagine if the African Union had had a summit, a conference, just to express gratitude in a formal setting, a day or two, a global event on Haiti and what Haiti meant to them, to us? So the question is always about this responsibility. And Durban was about responsibility. I would have loved to have seen somewhere the African nations coming together to have a summit to talk about what they can do for Haiti, what we can now do to help Haiti as a continent, given what Haiti has done for us. It's all about responsibility, and leadership without responsibility, you find yourself on the wrong side of the discussion every time, on the wrong side. And yes, from the African perspective, we do sit back and we see the continuing crisis in Haiti, the search for balance, the search for democracy, the search for accountability. But we also know what the French did. We know what the Europeans did. We all know. A little responsibility, from the other side. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'll jump straight to Jamaica.
Okay, real quick. So my question is kind of close to YV's, but it's more about loyalty. Brought up the Jewish people, how they're loyal to Israel. And so how do we think we should we can get the next generation to be loyal to our African heritage, our African DNA? Like you said, we're global Africans. I'm an African who happens to live in America. How do you get the next generation to be loyal to Africa or our African roots? So we won't just have, like you said, scholars writing books about Pan-Africanism, where we actually live in it and embodying it across the globe.
And yes, and what Global Africa does is to remove from the center any idealistic perception that African countries, especially those with resources, Nigeria and other countries, it removes from the table the unrealistic expectation that Africa as a continent, or Africa in the context of nations, are going to participate in the development of African nations, African majority nations elsewhere. If you don't have that expectation, then you can get on with the business of building your African identity where you are. You're in Jamaica, it's an African nation. You strengthen and build your Africanness and your African identity where you are in your Jamaica nation. And you make it clear that your Jamaica nation is an African nation. That's what it is. And from that understanding, then you can engage the African continent and individual African states. You engage them as equals. I know, for example, that there's a very good conversation at the moment between Jamaica and Nigeria in the collaboration around music, art, and performance culture, because the two countries are heading in similar directions. And the Jamaican artists really will have to have a better grounding in terms of African musicality and so on, dance and African musicality. So you strengthen your Africanness where you are, then you reach out from a position of your own base and you engage in bilateral conversations or multilateral conversations and you build up that. But the notion that somehow your primary organizational focus should be building up Africa or expecting Africa to come to your aid, I think you have to dispense with those two concepts. Strengthen your Africanness, build your African identity, and then participate in relations. But you don't have those relations like a mother and child relations. The mother-child thing is over. The child has now become an adult. These countries, these African countries are no longer children. They're no longer children of Africa unless you're using the word, poetically, right? Jamaica is a sound African country equal to Nigeria. That is a strong African country and they must work together. But the mother-child thing and that we in the Caribbean, we are Creoles in Africa, they are the pure African and we are the mix-up Africans. All of that nonsense has to go, right? So we are fighting for our future as global Africans. So you fight for your brothers and sisters in Jamaica. You also fight for your brothers and sisters in Nigeria, South Africa, wherever they are. And you have a global Africa view. Everything you do it to strengthen your African brothers and sisters around you. You do it as an example to strengthen those on the African continent, but do not subordinate yourself. That phase of Pan-Africanism is over.